Hi, welcome to the Reversing Autoimmune series. The title of this presentation is The Autoimmune Crisis and How to Reverse It. My name is Gabriel Arruda, and I have a question for you. If I asked you, what is our current greatest health crisis? What would be your answer? If I asked a group of people, what's our current greatest health crisis? What do you think the answers that I would get? Cancer, diabetes, heart disease, maybe AIDS, things like that, right? You know, all of those would be really fantastic guesses, but neither of those would actually be the correct answer. You know, as we talk about health crisis, there's a lot of misinformation out there, and we're going to talk about what the greatest health crisis is. Before we get into that, a little bit more about myself. I'm an author, an avid health researcher, and an autoimmune survivor. And I actually have had autoimmune hepatitis leading to liver cirrhosis, major food sensitivities, digestion problems, sleep problems, headaches, even migraines, chronic fatigue, and I also suffered with a terrible skin condition as a result of that. But by the grace of God, with lots of hard work and research, with the help from my wonderful wife and several natural-minded health professionals, I was able to reverse all of those. And I'm very grateful today. And my wife and I have put together a website, an ebook talking about how we did it called reverseautoimmune.com. And we have a passion for this because not only do I have a personal experience with it, but we believe that this is the current greatest health crisis that we're dealing with as a country. And so look at these statistics and you decide whether you think this is the current greatest health crisis. There are 80 to 100 different kinds of autoimmune diseases. And according to the American Autoimmune Related Disease Association, approximately 50 million Americans, that's 20% of the population, or 1 in 5 people, suffer from an autoimmune disease. Some experts are even saying 80 million. That's a lot of people. And here are some common diseases, autoimmune diseases that you may have heard of. We have rheumatoid arthritis, multiple sclerosis, lupus, Hashimoto's thyroiditis, PCOS, there's Crohn's disease, type 1 diabetes is actually an autoimmune disease, there's Graves' disease, celiac disease, and vitiligo, just to name a few. There's way, way more than that. And the symptoms that people deal with when they're suffering from an autoimmune disease are really diverse. There's so many. Let me just name some of the more common ones. There's food allergies, chronic fatigue, rashes, joint pain, headaches, organ failure, brain fog, and a lot of neurological diseases as well, like ADD, ADHD, even OCD is attributed to autoimmune-based causes. So, who gets autoimmune diseases? Who gets them? Just about everybody. Every level of society, old, young, rich, poor, men, women, children, and even infants get them. However, women are definitely the most affected group of people who suffer from autoimmune diseases. And 75% of all people diagnosed with autoimmune diseases are women. So that's a really large chunk. And in some diseases like lupus, it's even higher. 9 out of 10 people who get lupus are female. They're women. The age range is typically childbearing years, 15 years old to roughly about 50 years old. Pregnancy is also a big issue. A lot of women get it while pregnant or 1 to 12 months after delivery. And certain autoimmune diseases hit certain ethnic groups a little bit harder than others. For instance, let's use lupus as an example. If you're an African American female, you are 3 times more likely to get lupus than a Caucasian female. But that's switched with diabetes type 1, which is autoimmune. Caucasians are more likely to get diabetes type 1 than other ethnicities. And then Hispanic, Asian, Native American, they also rank higher in different autoimmune diseases. Autoimmune diseases is considered the 8th leading cause of death among women. And it shortens their lifespan by an average of 15 years. What could you do with 15 years? Think about that. That's a lot of life. And I think about the women in my own family who were affected by autoimmune, and my mother could have lived easily 15 years longer were it not for her situation. Not just that, autoimmune diseases are very expensive. Listen to these figures. According to one well-known physician, Dr. Mark Hyman, he said more people have autoimmune diseases than cancer, heart disease, and diabetes combined. Did you hear that? That's incredible. More people have autoimmune diseases than cancer, diabetes, and heart disease combined. And if you look at the numbers, which I did, it's absolutely true. And annually, it costs twice as much to take care of an autoimmune patient than it does to take care of a cancer patient. Twice as much. Autoimmune patients are really expensive. The global autoimmune disease impact was valued at $12.3 billion in 2014. That's a lot. That's a lot of money. But listen to this. The National Institutes of Health says if you add in all the factors, it's really about $100 billion annually, every year, to take care of autoimmune patients. That's a lot of money. It's very expensive. Friends, not just this, autoimmune diseases are growing. They're growing tremendously. In 2008, nearly 24 million Americans suffered from an autoimmune disease. 24 million. 8 years later, that doubled to approximately 50 million. Doubled. So think about this. 8 years from there, what's it going to be? 100 million at the going rate? And another 8 years? And another 8 years? So in 20 years, 30 years, my question is, who's going to be left to take care of the autoimmune disease patients? It's a really, really huge issue. It's growing tremendously. It's very concerning. And so I used to tell people, I think autoimmune diseases are going to be our next great healthcare crisis in our country. But I believe that statement is not correct anymore. Really, I have to say, autoimmune diseases are our current greatest healthcare crisis. But the bizarre thing is, it's completely unrecognized. The first question I asked is, what would you say the greatest healthcare crisis is? And what would all the common answers be? Cancer, heart disease, diabetes. Yeah, those are all very big. But who would say autoimmune diseases? Almost no one. A survey said despite the wide presence of autoimmune diseases, surveys show that 90% of people cannot summon to name one single autoimmune disease when asked to mention one specifically, despite the fact that it's really our greatest healthcare crisis. And this is strange. Statistically, it is, but nobody knows about it. It's this healthcare crisis that we're completely unaware of. And doctors and scientists are totally baffled by autoimmune diseases. They really don't know what to do with it. The typical autoimmune patient sees 6 to 10 doctors before they're finally diagnosed with an autoimmune disease. That's a lot of doctors to go through before you finally get diagnosed. And there have been millions and millions of dollars dumped into research for autoimmune diseases. And yet despite that, they're still they don't know what to do with it. As a matter of fact, the National Institutes of Health spent $591 million in 2003, that's just 1 year, researching autoimmune diseases. Despite spending all that money, what are the answers? There's no known cure for MS. There's no known cure for lupus. There's no known cure for Graves' rheumatoid arthritis. You'll probably have to take medications the rest of your life. You'll probably need surgery. That's the standard answers that's coming out of the medical community, despite millions and millions of dollars happening in research. So a good question to ask is, what happened? I mean, how did we go from no one even hearing or knowing what autoimmune diseases are to 1 in 5 people having it, 20% of the population? How did it just explode like this? And for those of you who are old enough, let me just quiz you real quick. In the 50s, did anyone have autoimmune diseases that you knew of? Did Sally down the street have an autoimmune disease, or did Grandma or Grandpa have an autoimmune disease? Very unknown. What about the 60s? What about the 70s? Remember any autoimmune diseases in the 70s, people having them? It's almost none. But you get to the 80s, and especially when you get to the 90s, and after you get past the year 2000, 1 in 5 people. Millions and millions of people having autoimmune diseases. So how do we go from almost no one hearing about them to 30 years later, 50 to 80 million people? Just boom, this huge healthcare crisis that's just exploded out of nowhere. That's what we're going to talk about in this series. Why has this happened? And more importantly, what we can do about it. How you can heal from an autoimmune condition. Good question to ask is there any hope? Is there any hope in this situation? And I know what this feels like by experience. When you're suffering with an autoimmune disease, when you've had doctor after doctor look you in the face and say, we don't know why it happens. We're not sure, you'll probably just have to take these medications and hopefully some research will come out. When that happens over and over, you start to feel like there's no hope. You start to feel like maybe there's no answers. Maybe something will never happen. But I want to tell you today, thank God, there's answers. I'm grateful for that. And in this series, we're going to talk about the 4 main factors causing autoimmune diseases. 4 main factors. And you see, you have to understand why autoimmune diseases are happening and where they're coming from. Otherwise, you're never going to be able to successfully treat it. You have to understand those things. And so we're going to talk about those 4 factors, and then we're going to talk about how to heal from an autoimmune disease. And we're going to talk about a 5-step protocol that I followed and that we've seen other people follow that has reversed my condition as well as other people's autoimmune conditions. And I followed this protocol strictly, and I mean very strictly, and within 4 months, I saw major improvements. Within 9 months, I saw a complete reversal in my autoimmune situation. And so it was really encouraging. And what I could tell you is, every person who I have personally witnessed who is strictly, that's a key word, strictly followed this protocol has greatly improved, if not reversed their autoimmune condition entirely. The reason is because when you address the foundational issues lying at the foundation of autoimmune diseases, when you stop perpetuating the problem, give the body what it needs to heal, the body heals. It knows what to do. Now, what about those complicated cases? You know, there's always little exceptions here and there. There's always complicated cases. And once in a while, we'll run into one. Typically, based on my research, this is due to something happening in the genetics that most physicians don't understand yet. I'm going to touch on that a little bit in this series, but there's even hope for those situations. It's just harder, a little bit more difficult to deal with those. And before I go on, I want to share my testimony. I want to share my personal story, my personal situation about my autoimmune disease, because my own life has been deeply affected by autoimmune diseases. And my family, unfortunately, has a very sad history with autoimmune diseases. Let's rewind a little bit to 1998. Do you remember where you were in 1998? Well, it was just after Christmas of 1998. My family and I were driving back from Burbank, California, where we would always spend Christmas with our half of the family that lives down in Southern California. And as we were driving back home, my mom just starts itching. Just starts feeling itchy. No rash, no noticeable difference in her skin. She just starts itching all over the place. And over the next weeks, she starts losing weight. And further down the road, her skin and her eyes started turning yellow. She started to get jaundiced. And an early trip to the doctor in 1999 found that she had scarring on her liver and what they call fatty liver as well. Her liver was getting damaged. That was very clear. Now, friends, this was shocking. This was shocking to everyone because my mom was the natural remedies queen. She was the natural remedies queen. I mean, she was the health lady at church. And you all know what I mean by the health lady at church. There's always usually that lady at church that's the health lady, right? You know, if you have a health question, you go to her and she's got some natural remedy and some concoction. That was my mom. She was the health lady. And I remember growing up, people always coming over our house and my mom giving them treatments and people getting better. And it was actually really great growing up in that environment. And so mom was the natural remedies queen. So she was going to fight it. She was going to fight this new health crisis she ran into. And she tried, and she tried, and she tried. But you know, no one understood a lot about autoimmune diseases back then. And her situation just got worse and worse and worse until she was finally diagnosed with autoimmune hepatitis leading to liver cirrhosis and eventual liver failure. Well, one fateful morning, my mom woke me up, and it was just me and her at the house. I believe my sister was away at college at that time. My dad, who does preaching appointments, he's a preacher, traveling preacher. He was at a speaking engagement somewhere. She woke me up one morning with a very weak voice, letting me know that she had been throughout the night vomiting and defecating blood. It's shocking news to hear first thing in the morning from your mother. And you see, what happens is when you have liver failure, the blood has to find other places to go because the liver processes about 70%, it filters about 70% of the body's blood. And so when the blood can't go through there, it has to find alternate routes. And it ends up going through blood vessels that were not intended to take that much blood. Well, one of the routes that the blood was taking on my mother was a vein going right by her esophagus, right up and down there. And so much blood was traveling through this particular vessel that it actually burst. It just popped. And it was literally just pouring blood down into her stomach. So she was started vomiting and defecating blood. And so she really didn't want to. My mom really didn't want to go to the hospital. This was the natural remedies queen, you know. Didn't want to go, but we had to make the hard decision, and I called 911, and the ambulance came and picked her up. She came hours away from dying that day. Very close. She lost so much blood. And from that time forward, she was hospitalized, including that time, 3 different times. And the last time she was hospitalized, it became really, really clear that if mom did not get a new liver, if she didn't get a liver transplant, she was going to die. She was not going to make it. So at this point, she was at UCSF, University Hospital in San Francisco, and her condition had gotten so bad, she actually made it onto a transplant list. And you know, it was good in the sense that she moved up the list really fast. And the reason why that was because she had never had 1 drop of alcohol in her entire life. So she didn't need a new liver because she had abused her body. This was due to something else that we didn't all understand at that time yet. And as the days and weeks moved on, she got sicker and weaker and sicker and weaker. She actually got to the point where she stopped speaking English to us. You see, Spanish was my mom's first language, and English was her second language. And she got so incoherent and just so out of it that she stopped speaking her second language, English. And she would look at us, and I don't speak hardly any Spanish, and so she knows I don't speak Spanish, and she would just look at me speaking Spanish, and I would just be telling her, Mom, I don't speak Spanish. Why are you speaking to me in Spanish? I can't communicate with you. And so she just really got out of it, and it got to the point where she was going in and out of comas. And the doctors were very concerned. It was really clear that if mom did not get a new liver soon, she was going to die. Well, it got so close that the doctors weren't sure if she was going to make it another week. Maybe a week and a half, 2 weeks max, but it got really, really close. Then she finally, at that point, made it to the top of the list. She was number 1. Well, a liver came in. A liver became available. And it came all the way, I believe it was from Colorado, and they flew it in real quick. And the day it got to the hospital, she made it into the surgery room. They performed the surgery. They gave her the new liver. The transplant occurred, and her new liver took. The body took the new liver, which was a concern. And she was recovering from surgery. She was doing really well, and we were just celebrating because mom got a new liver. Mom was granted a new lease on life, and she had been saved, and that happened in the year 2000. Well, just shortly after that, Grandma, mom's mom, started experiencing some of the same symptoms that my mom had. Grandma went to the hospital, and she was also diagnosed with autoimmune hepatitis leading to liver cirrhosis. And, you know, due to Grandma's age, she was already in her 80s, and due to the fact that she'd seen what my mom had went through, she wasn't going to get a transplant. She just decided to ride it out. And Grandma, very shortly after that, ended up passing away. Grandma died in 2002, and she's resting in Jesus at the moment. And you know, all was well. All was good for about 10 years, till about 2012. Late 2012, mom's liver symptoms came back. They started coming back, and they came back quicker than the first time. And so Mom tried to fight it. We tried to help her fight it. But this time, unfortunately, Mom would not win the battle over autoimmune liver cirrhosis. Mom died in 2013 due to her autoimmune condition. And you know, Mom's loss was really difficult for me. I kind of grew up, maybe some of you can identify, I kind of grew up a mother's boy. You know, I had just had a really close relationship with my mom. We actually share the same birthday. I was born on my mom's birthday. And, you know, there were some things that only I could tell her, that no one else really had the ability to tell her that she would listen to. And we just had that kind of close, special relationship. So I took Mom's passing really, really hard. And in the wake of Mom's passing, we had a good friend come to us and say, you know, these things could be genetic and they often run in the family, so you should get some testing done. You ought to get tested just to check yourself out. And you know, my wife and I were really inclined to do that because I had already started experiencing some symptoms, some issues with my own liver. As early as 29 years old, I started seeing abnormal fluctuation in my liver enzyme, particularly the enzyme that my mother always had trouble with. And not just that, I had developed a really bad skin infection that was rapidly growing on my body, a fungal skin infection. And also, it didn't happen very often, but after eating certain foods, I would get a terrible migraine. I mean, vomiting and just feeling like your head is going to explode, all that, terrible migraines. And I even had some very slight jaundice symptoms as well. Well, we had some testing done, and between the test results and all the combined evidence of the symptoms I was experiencing, all the combined evidence of the family history with my grandma and my mother suffering from autoimmune conditions, everything was indicating that I had the exact same disease as my mom. Just 6 months after her passing, and I find out I have the same situation. That was tough. You know, I had to radically change my diet almost overnight, and I'm really grateful to my wife. She was just a whiz in the kitchen and just went and was just real brilliant in all the things that she had to learn, and new way of cooking, new way of living, and it helped a lot. But thankfully also, we had made recent friends with a health professional who had an autoimmune disease herself and learned how to reverse it naturally. And that was, I tell you, that was a godsend. That was a divine appointment. I did treatments with her for several weeks. Then after that, I continued self-administering a program that was very similar to hers at home, and within months, I stopped experiencing my symptoms. Everything got better. I had blood work done, I had an ultrasound done on my liver, and test results came back. My inflammation was completely gone. I had no inflammation, my liver looked great, and I felt actually the best I had felt probably in my whole life since I was like a kid. I felt wonderful, and my disease was totally reversed. And so my wife and I, you know, were obviously just ecstatic over this experience, and we decided to put together a website eventually, and we wrote an ebook about how we did it. And the only thing, however, that didn't clear up was my skin infection. That actually continued to get worse. And so also I would notice that if I would eat things that I wasn't supposed to, whether intentionally or not, my headaches would come back and my fatigue would come back as well. And so it took several more years from that point till I was able to finally reverse my skin condition and finally get my energy back. And so if I behave now, if I do better, that I actually am in great shape. So, you know, and also I wanted to say at this point, it's not uncommon with autoimmune diseases for when your immune system's down, it makes you vulnerable to co-infections and other things. And it's not uncommon for those co-infectors to actually be worse than the autoimmune disease itself. And I believe that was the case with me. And so we spent 7 years from the times of my first symptoms to the point where I consider myself fully out of the woods, which was when my skin cleared up. We spent 7 years just researching and battling and struggling and praying and researching more. And, you know, we learned a lot of lessons in those 7 years. And the things that we really discovered, that the lessons that we learned that were the most important were the spiritual lessons. And this is something that I just want to encourage. If you're watching, if you have an autoimmune disease, I just want to encourage you. It's so easy to get caught up in just heal me, just tell me what to do, just let's get this thing out of the way. I want my life back. I want my energy back. I want to go back to the way things used to be. I just want to encourage you, especially if you have faith in Jesus, if you're coming from a Christian perspective, there is more to this than meets the eye. We're going to be talking more about that, about the spiritual lessons that it's intended for you to learn through this situation. And, you really start asking yourself questions as year after year goes on. Do I trust God? Do I really believe God cares for me as this thing just drags on and on and on? If he does care for me, then why aren't I being healed? Doesn't it say that he's almighty, that he has all power? So very relevant, very important questions that people commonly struggle with. So as we wrap this up, I want to share my 5-step protocol. And then we're going to spend a lot more of the seminar getting into the 5-step protocol and what that actually looked like. The 5-step protocol is this. Step number 1, remove foods and toxins that are damaging the gut. That's the first step. Step number 2, heal the gut. You have to take care of and heal the gut. That's step 2. Step number 3 is nutrify. Nutrify the system. Give nourishment, give nutrition to the body. The 4th step is cleanse and detox. You have to cleanse out, you have to detox the body from those years and years of toxins. Then the last step is remove chronic stress. You have to take that stress really seriously. You have to look it in the eye and you have to figure out, what can I do to remove the chronic stress? It's a huge contributor to autoimmune situations. And one key thing is all of these have to be done. Well, I should say they're most effective when they're all done simultaneously. I mean, you could heal over a long period of time, but for more rapid healing, they all have to be done simultaneously. And so how can you actually do this? How can you put these 5 steps into practice? Well, that's what we're going to be discussing this whole seminar. And so our next presentations, we're going to be discussing what are autoimmune diseases and the 4 factors that are causing them. The 4 different factors that are causing autoimmune diseases. And so whether you're watching through a video set or online, I really, really encourage you to watch this thing all the way through, and most importantly, have an open heart, and I really encourage you to put these things into practice, because it's very common for people to get this information and not do a lot about it. And so don't miss it. May you be blessed in your pursuit of health.